It's a very necessary measure. And why? Well, we cannot expect that the whole world looks exactly like the European Union's market, right? So those that are producing here, that are facing the measures we're taking in terms of CBAM, and then export, will face other conditions over there. So if you want to square that circle, want to push for decarbonization here, but also want to give them a fighting chance on the international market, you do need to do something.
It's January 2026 and CBAM has landed. We're starting a new era of international trade taxes based on carbon emissions. But has this brought clarity to the market, or is it just a new era with more headaches for steel buyers and importers? We're about to find out. This is Speaking of Steel. I'm Tom.
I'm Jon.
And I'm Kaye.
Welcome, guys. It's great to see you both again. Lots happened since the last podcast. All sorts going on in the world of CBAM, and it's yet to be debated, I think, whether there is clarity or whether there is more confusion. Kaye, what have people been asking us about? What's the response to the latest batch of European Commission documents?
They all want to know what it means for them, really. I know we had a lot of new documents released just before Christmas, but a lot of people still don't fully understand what that actually means for them when it comes to importing, what it's going to cost them. So although there's a lot of information, they don't really fully understand all of that, and they want us to help them really digest it. So we've had a lot of questions, haven't we, Jon?
And not surprisingly so, because there was 26 documents that were produced just before the Christmas break, so the timing was perfect. And within those 26 documents, you had information on, there's so much here, I've got a list of it, how to register as a declarant, how to go through the verification and accreditation process for a mill, what they're going to actually do with some of the funds that are going to be raised by these CBAM charges, confirmation that we're finally actually going to see CBAM being extended downstream. But then more importantly, there were the two really big ones. There was the one which outlined the European benchmark values. So that's sort of the delineation between clean steel and dirty steel. And then the other absolutely massive document, 1,600 pages, I think it was, which went country by country with all the...
Searching for a particular country in that document was just horrendous.
Yeah. So one of the first jobs we did was try and get this onto a spreadsheet and off that awful PDF. We've got some brainiacs back in the office working on that right now. So on there, it's got the country-specific default values. For each country around the world, for each product category, the European Union's come along and set an emissions value. Now, this is based on their 10% dirtier steel producers in those countries. And what this number is, it's essentially one of the key bits that's going to be used when you're working out just how much you're going to be charged for CBAM.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, though, isn't it, Kaye? You can imagine, it was difficult for us winding down for the Christmas holidays. Some people have probably already broken up for the break. What's the response been from people?
Shock in some cases, to be honest. Some of those values were quite high, higher than some people were expecting. So when you worked out what the CBAM charges were going to be for some of the countries, for some of the products, it worked out quite a bit higher than people were expecting them to be, particularly for some countries, for instance, like Taiwanese stainless steel for cold rolled, for instance, where people were expecting that to be, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 euros. That ends up being significantly higher than that if you're using the default values in that document rather than maybe an assessed value from the mill. So it then means that people who have ordered now probably aren't going to consider, maybe following through with those orders. So it's making people sit back and reassess what they're going to do in 2026 for their order that they have on order already, and maybe how they're going to proceed going forward with their supplier base.
So it sounds like there's still an awful lot of variables, and I guess that makes it hard for MEPS to answer specific questions as well, specifically with numbers. But Jon, can you clarify what the difference is between those sort of default values and the assessed values that Kaye refers to there?
Okay, so this document that came out with the default values, it gets a little bit complicated, but essentially if you can't get the mill that you're sourcing from get the emissions there verified with actual data, you can use these default values. The problem with these default values is, as I say, that they're assumed to be some of the dirtiest producers within that country. The idea being that you've got this incentive to get this actual data, and I think that's one of the key reasons for it. Not necessarily to penalise people, but to promote that process of getting the actual data. The problem is, at the moment, the people to get this actual data, it needs to be verified, and the process to get accredited for the verification, we're right at the start of that. That's not going to really happen until later on this year. That's actually going to sort of start kicking in. The only bit of good news people have is that they have until 2027 to get this accreditation done. So you can essentially report from the emissions from the year before next year. Yeah, so long as all that accreditation gets done in 2027, you're sort of covered for this year. But then it's only really matters if it turns out that your actual emissions are lower than default values, because otherwise you just use those.
Yeah, is that something that people are particularly anxious about then, Kaye? I guess everyone is in a rush to see their suppliers get verified quickly.
Yeah, especially for those suppliers who are saying that their emissions are considerably below the default figures. So, those Asian suppliers in particular who have quite high default values otherwise, where they're sort of saying to their customers that their actual emissions are considerably below those, and they're the ones that are trying to sell into Europe, and they would be a better advantage if they were to have verified actual emissions, but they need to be verified before they could use those verified figures. So it's a difficult one because the customers are concerned, whether that would be verified below the default figures, and also whether they could get verified in time, because there is a concern that that verification process could take a long time, and whether because they've got to have a physical assessment, haven't they, at the plant? So are there enough assessors to physically get round all the plants needed in the time available?
You said it when we were looking at it in the office the other day. You said was it POSCO were saying
POSCO,
that they were going to be producing steel at 1.4 tons per ton of CO2 per ton of steel.
Yeah.
And
their emissions is so much higher.
Got it here somewhere.
The South Korea, it's not on a mill level, it's on a country level, and the South Korean country.
Yeah. Yeah, the country specific.
Yeah. So the default value is something like 4 tons of CO2 per ton of steel.
It's a massive difference cost-wise on the CBAM charge into Europe. If they come out at 1.4, then I think technically that's below the European.
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same as the European one. So there'd be very minimal CBAM charge there. Until that verification gets done, they're going to be kicking and screaming.
It's hard to understand how much of a gamble that is at this point, buying that stock through 2026 and not fully understanding whether that verification is going to take place, how the numbers are going to come out at the end of it, and it all relates to your bottom line, doesn't it? Ultimately, it's quite a scary situation.
Yeah. There's a lot of risk for importers over this next 2 years. I think until this sort of settles down, until this verification process really beds in, there's a huge amount of risk.
I mean, some of the Asian mills are quite prepared. They have been preparing themselves ahead of this verification process. They've got a lot of the paperwork and a lot of the processes in place ready for this verification. It's just a case of we don't really know what the process is going to be, and we don't know how long it's going to take. But there are some of the mills that are a lot more prepared for this. So in theory, it shouldn't take too long to get verified. But there's still that uncertainty surrounding that verification process. So there is still a risk involved in that. And customers in Europe still have that, shall I, shan't I consideration to take into account before placing an order. So they're coming to us and they're wanting to take into account all of the costs involved before they place an order with them, and they're asking all the questions to us about all the potential costs that they may need to take into account. What would the potential CBAM charge be? if the CBAM charge would be, or if the CO2 level would be X or Y. So we're getting a lot of questions at the moment from our customers. So
a lot of questions, and they're all kind of looking for like a number, a answer. So, it's going to be, I don't know, 100 euros or 150 or whatever. They're looking for a number. And just the way the scheme's set up, you can't really give them a number. The best you can do is kind of sort of give them a little bit of a range of numbers with a whole bunch of caveats and explanations of where this range comes from.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of numbers knocking around, haven't we? Everyone's trying to get on the front foot via social media, via their own publications, trying to look like they've got the answers. As you say, often there's a range and a lot of caveats. I know we've been very, forward in suggesting that that's the case. We can't just give a specific number at this point. But by the same token, John, I think you have got some indication of what we might be able to see.
Let's see if we can give you a few specific numbers. The numbers I'm going to give you are going to be based on an EU ETS price. So that's the price of carbon in Europe of 88 euros per tonne. That's what it currently is this week.
Which can vary.
Which
significantly.
can vary.
We've seen that. John and I were talking about that.
And some of the forecasts for the EU ETS price for this year, next year, I mean, based on what's going to happen with CBAM, it could go up significantly, depending on how much comes in and how much people are trading the EU ETS. I mean, I've heard a lot of people that have been saying that they're going to be hedging their carbon, so we could see that rise considerably over 2026 and into 2027. So
I think a lot, John, if I'm right, and I don't want to steal your thunder at all, but some of the calculations I saw before Christmas were based on an ETS price of 84.
84, yes, that's where we were Euros. Just before Christmas.
Now you're saying we're at 88.
Now we're at 88 this week.
Okay, I'll let you.
So one of the things that we're going to be able to do is in 2026, instead of using the weekly average, which will happen ongoing, in 2026 you get to use the quarterly average. So nobody, until we get to the end of the quarter, nobody's going to know exactly where that's going to end up. But all we've seen is this price trend up through the second half of 2025, and then a big jump just as we went from December to January. So having said all of that, I was just looking at some of the largest exporters of hot rolled coil into Europe, and Turkey, India, and the Ukraine were the three largest. So with all of our caveats and our EU ETS price of 88 euros per tonne, we're looking at a CBAM charge of around about 115 euros for Turkish material, 125 euros for Ukrainian material, and Indian material, 295 euros would be the CBAM charge, which it takes them out of the market really for that. Then we've also got the safeguards that will be getting tightened in 6 months' time. Where exactly we're going to end up with imports? We also did the same. I also did the same thing with rebar, and we got something very similar. So we saw Turkey once again. It's got a fairly low CBAM charge. Now we've been saying this for a little while because we've been looking at the way they produce steel, and with that being sort of electric arc furnace, it's generally sort of a little bit cleaner. So you'd expect that number to be lower. But some of the other producers, some of the large exporters. So Egypt was one of the largest exporters the numbers we were looking at. Once again, that's 300 euros. And then I had to include some stainless steel for Kaye here. She's a big fan. So stainless steel cold rolled coil imports. Yep. South Korea, we're looking at 240 euros.
South Korea should have a much lower figure in theory.
Yep, right. But the big one, Taiwan. So they were the second largest exporter of cold roll into Europe in 24. 730 euros.
Now, the reason for that high number is because previously for a while, they've been using raw material feed from Indonesia. So I know that some of the Taiwanese producers have gone back to melting some of their own feedstock in order to get around this. The problem is that figure hasn't taken that into account. But I think the Taiwanese producers assumed that they could do that and they could have like a split supply. They could melt in-house, send it to Europe and have a lower CBAM charge. But that would rely on the verification process. Yeah. So this is where that verification process for the Taiwanese producers is going to come into play for them. Or it's going to be very important for them. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to ship to Europe at all, because that is going to be prohibitive for the Taiwanese imports into Europe.
So I guess we're expecting, with the combination of CBAM and the new safeguard regime coming in the summer, we would expect imports to decline anyway. But I guess what we're going to see this year more than anything is a massive redistribution of sourcing, and things that are going to be panning out in completely different lines in terms of carbon emissions in the short term.
Yeah, in that short term, people are going to be pouring through those documents, looking at those default values and seeing where the lower numbers are, seeing whether there is the opportunity to import from there, certainly in the next sort of few months. Then, like I say, we've got the safeguards kicking in, and there's going to be a whole bunch of new country-specific quotas applying to those. So this process is going to be done again in the summer. It gives European mills sort of, I think, the opportunity they've really been crying out for these past few years. Because remember, CBAM's here in the European eyes is to level the playing field. The European industries have been having to pay for these CO2 emissions or for quite some time now. Okay, so there are some exemptions, but it's really going to start applying to steel makers this year as well. So they see it, like I say, as leveling the playing field. So it's going to give a chance for European mills to start increasing their capacity, they increase their output, increase their market share. I think they're going to be very happy with this.
Okay, you're head of price analysis and forecasting at MEPS. Have you already been able to take time and have a look at how these CBAM figures that we've received in the last month or so, how they might affect steel prices in Europe going forward? How significant a change is this likely to be?
So we've already been forecasting that the import volumes would decrease in the first half of this year. We've been forecasting that for a while now. So we expected supply into Europe to fall significantly as the start of CBAM came into force. So we anticipated a reduction in supply and, as such, an increase in steel prices from the European steel mills as a result of that. So we'd already factored that into our steel price forecasts, and we anticipate steel prices to go up from now, basically. It had already started prior to the Christmas break. The European mills will try to push prices up higher on the back of these higher CBAM charges. The issue we have in the European market is the demand. So we've still got a climate of weak demand, end user wise, and also on the distribution side. We did see some sort of strategic stocking prior to the Christmas break, or sort of in the market. We still had higher stock levels. So it's going to be interesting to watch how the distributors and the end users react to this. We're currently in the process of speaking to all the distributors and the end users at the moment to sort of see how people are reacting. So we are at the moment taking stock to see how everybody's reacting to this, and we will make an assessment and potentially an adjustment based on that. But at the moment, we're still assessing the full impact of everything. At the moment, we haven't adjusted our forecast. We had all the provisional numbers that came out, all the leaked documents, shall we say, prior to this anyway. So we had an inkling of some of these numbers, although some of them are a little bit higher than we that were in those leaked documents. But yeah, we had already anticipated a massive reduction in import volumes anyway. And obviously we already knew about the changes in the import safeguard measures from July.
It's going to be a crucial year for those downstream businesses, isn't it? The service centres, the distributors, they're going to really struggle with some of these changes. And, we talked about the redistribution of sourcing strategies, but it's going to be tough to get that low-cost material, isn't it? And that's going to challenge a lot of businesses.
It will be, yeah. And I imagine there'll be a lot of people who'll be looking and pouring through these documents, calculating, although they'll need to calculate what all the CBAM charges are. I mean, if they're buying, say, for instance, hot rolled coil, they'll need to know what all the CBAM charges are from every single country that they can buy from, and also the potential impact of the safeguard measures from July. And then they'll be looking at their supplier base, and they'll be looking at what then their options are going forward. And there'll be a point at which the European steel price level will tip over. So there'll always be a ceiling price on the European steel market where, you know, it tips over that edge, and then the import price will become competitive again. And you've got to realise that also the Asian market may come down to compensate for that. So, you know, there's always that balance to be had. The Asian market is oversupplied. It has been for a very long time. I know the Chinese are trying to combat that, but we will still see some imports coming in, and it will return at some point. The problem we've had previously is that people didn't know what the cost would be to import, and that's partly what was holding people back from purchasing. If they can calculate how much their costs are going to be, they can then work out, well, actually, which is going to be the best place to buy from. And these calculations are what people need in order to make their decisions. So I think they'll take a little bit of time to calculate, and which is why we're having all these questions coming in. Lots of questions coming in to Jon and myself asking, if I'm buying from this place for this product, how much is it going to cost me? Obviously, depending on what the EU ETS price is, but they can hedge the carbon to help them on that front. But
I think what Kaye is sort of saying is it's not going to shut the door on imports. There's still going to be that opportunity for people, like, you know, exporting into Europe, but it is going to massively realign things. It's basically sort of taking a set of dice and just throwing the numbers. It's going to take a little while for all that to sort of settle down, but it will settle down. That balance will be found again, and that market will continue.
I think just to wrap things up a little bit, I mean, we often forget it's quite transactional. There's a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of numbers involved in this, but it's been an emotional roller coaster throughout the second half of 2025 in particular, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. Kaye, I mean, do you think that the sector in itself and all steel consuming sectors, I would ravel into that, are satisfied with how the European Commission have handled this? Because it from the outside looking in, it looks like people have a right to be a little bit annoyed.
The feedback we've got, I would say no. Nobody's been particularly pleased, partly because the information they've received hasn't been particularly clear and not timely enough, shall we say. So I think the fact that the information that they've been getting, a lot of it has been sort of leaked information, and then the information that's been leaked hasn't been the same as any official information. And then obviously a lot of the information came really late on, or not at the time that they were initially told it was going to come at. So yeah, let's just say that the information we've been getting back from the market hasn't been particularly positive on that front. I had a lot of comments coming back saying that they expected information to get landed on Christmas Day as like a Christmas present, or not a Christmas present, and then obviously at least it came before then, but a little bit before then. It still wasn't the best timing, shall we say. A lot of people were just winding down for Christmas when it arrived, and a lot at once. I know me and Jon had some choice words at the time of the arrival.
Jon, a lot of those questions are going to come to you as well, aren't they, this year?
I've got to say, I don't think this has been handled particularly well by the European Commission, the way their briefings have been done, the way this information's been shared. But in their defence, this is the first time such a thing has happened. This is unprecedented, this CBAM measures. Nobody else has tried this before. It's a very complicated system. There are a lot of sort of technical details that do need to be worked out. So I understand why it's taken a long time. But 2 weeks before Christmas, come on. Seriously?
Yeah. 2
2 weeks before this actually impacts your bottom line. yeah, I can understand why everybody's really, really frustrated.
Do you think other countries like the UK who are considering a similar measure, they'll be looking on and thinking, this looks like a breeze, this looks like a good idea?
So one of the good things I think that the UK is going to be able to do by delaying their CBAM a little bit later. So the UK one starts on January 1st, 2027. So I think they've been able to sort of take stock of the way the EU approach, and I think their system's going to be slightly simpler. There's not going to be things like CBAM certificates that need to be purchased and surrendered. There is just going to simply be an extra tax, an extra line item on your bill for this CO2 tax based on how much steel you're bringing in. So I think it can be done a lot simpler, and I think there definitely are lessons to be learned. But once again, I think one of the key aims for the European Union isn't necessarily just to go through this bureaucratic box ticking exercise. It's to almost promote and implement the idea of a global carbon price. So who knows, in a couple of years' time, maybe that's where we end up.
Let's hope the process is finessed, because I don't think we can, I don't think we can stand going through that again, can we? This time next year and the year after, and whenever another country decides to fold out.
Keeps us in a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's true. I mean, we've been getting a lot of questions from customers because they don't understand it, and that's what we're here for, to go through all these documents and to help and to provide that service to our customers. So, yeah, I suppose keep the questions coming is the reason why we're here. So, yeah,
Well said,
hopefully we'll be able to provide some more information on a more widespread basis to our customers in the weeks ahead without them having to come to us first. So.
Great stuff, guys. Thanks ever so much for joining me and discussing the launch of CBAM proper in 2026. There's lots more to come on this one, isn't there? It'll run and run. But no, a great podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Tom.